Chapter 4. Author Dr. Dennis DePonte. Title Apex Entrepreneur.
Read by the co-author, Mike Duffy.
Hello, I'm Michael Duffy, co-author of brandsharksbook.com. You can go to brandsharksbook.com, get an autographed copy of this book, and I'll ship it to you. Chapter 4, Apex Entrepreneur by Dr. Dennis DePonte. Sorry if I said your last name wrong. Sharks are apex predators that sit on top of the oceanic food chain for a reason. They are fearless beasts that enjoy power, prestige, and the respect of those that surround them. Once locked in on a mission, they relentlessly pursue success with a kind of determination that rarely comes up short. It can be a lonely, cold, and dark experience at times, but sharks are willing to endure conditions that most common fish won't, to dominate their prey and never go hungry. That kind of fierce, independent drive is what sets them apart in the underwater kingdom. This is exactly what can propel you to be an apex entrepreneur if you learn from and follow the advice from the School of Brown Sharks in this book. The power, prestige, and respect of being a successful entrepreneur can only come by picking up and carrying the mantle of self-determination and the responsibility that comes along with it. No shark ever waits to be fed. You've got to overcome the common albatross of fear and embody the independence needed to rise to the apex of your success. If you are ever to achieve it, the vision of that success must compel the passion of your drive as ferociously as a drop of blood to the nose of a great white. This is my brand: fearlessness, independence, and passionate purpose. It is this brand that has fueled the trajectory of my career and the success of my business. I will never forget peering into the deep, dark abyss of the longest tunnel I've seen in my life. My family was living in São Miguel in the Portuguese archipelago called the Azores Islands. I'm sorry if I said that wrong or pronounced that wrong. Having been born and raised in Bermuda, it was an awesome opportunity to experience the island where my parents had been raised. They had taken us on many tours of the island where my sister Lisa and I were treated to so many stories of their youth. Mom had been raised in the city of Ponte Delgada and Dad in a small suburb called Faja de Cima, just 3 miles away. They would eventually meet 2,000 miles away on another Atlantic island, Bermuda, where their families had transplanted them to improve the quality of their lives. Growing up, I remember being fascinated by the stories of life from the Azores. They were stories of living in poor conditions, but always finding a way to make the best of their time. Stories of Dad and his friends getting into harmless mischief, such as chasing a bus with bare feet to catch a free ride on the bumper, or risky behavior like teaming up with his friends to swipe vegetables from a nearby farm to keep his family from going hungry. My mother spoke of the hard times of living in Ponte Delgada as a poor family. My grandmother would serve the rich, washing their fine linens and chinaware while going home and having to use the newspaper their groceries came wrapped in as toilet paper. I remember how foreign an idea it was to think that my mother and father had to live in such conditions. I was being raised in Bermuda, which at the time enjoyed having the second richest income per capita in the world. We lived in a tiny cottage that was no more than 600 square feet, and we definitely were not rich, but experienced a comfortable life and a good education due to the hard work and determination of my parents and their family. My grandparents found the courage to uproot from the familiarity of their meager beginnings to face the unknown and the promise of a better life. Their fearlessness had paid off, and my sister and I had benefited. Life in Bermuda was an exceptional upgrade from what they had lived through in the Azores. And now, ironically, I found myself back in the motherland, facing a certain fear of my own, this long, dark tunnel. In an area known as one of Portugal's top natural wonders sits a couple of lakes that fill up a huge volcanic crater. The village is called Sete Cidades, or the Seven Cities. The two lakes are Lagoa Azul and Lagoa Verde, or the blue lake and the green lake, because of the different colors they create due to the sunlight reflecting off them. Because the village sits within the massive crater that spans over 3 miles, all excess rainwater flooded into the lakes and caused massive flooding, wreaking havoc on the village. Back in the 1930s, they decided to dig a long tunnel through the edge of the crater to drain the excess floodwaters, which stretched over 3/4 of a mile. It was this tunnel where I felt like I turned from a boy into a man. Mom had walked up the entrance and looked into the dark, wet walls and immediately checked out. Dad, on the other hand, was all about it. Of course, as a 14-year-old boy, I wasn't going to let some tunnel scare me, and Lisa, my older sister, wasn't going to let me show more courage than her, so we were all in. Besides, we had a flashlight, so how scary could it be? Dad was in charge of the light and led the way. Excitement and a feeling of adventure quickly unraveled into tense situational awareness. The bright, humid sun of the Azores condensed into damp, cold darkness that commanded our senses. A tiny, faint pinprick of light marked the end of the tunnel. 3/4 of a mile had never felt so much like 300 miles. Lisa held onto Dad's strong guiding arm, but of course, my adolescent pride was too strong to show such weakness. Sometimes adventures like that stimulate adrenaline in a way that is invigorating, but the darkness was so heavy that it seemed to swallow up the beam of our meager flashlight, leaving the strong taste of anxiety in our mouths. We kept advancing through the tunnel, at one point catching a glimpse of a fleeting rat along the top of one of the pipelines. It was the scary stuff movies were made of, but we kept moving right along like Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. The light at the end of the tunnel was getting closer and closer. It felt like seeing land after being at sea for weeks. The plan was to go back over the hill so the ordeal would soon be over, and I was ready for it. I would say we were less than 100 yards from the exit when it happened. Perhaps it was planned, or perhaps it was an idea birthed spontaneously, but my father had decided to challenge my courage. All of a sudden, as the anticipation of the end reached its climax, he popped challenge. "Dennis," he said, "I bet you won't turn around and walk back by yourself with no light?" Wow. I'm not sure that my father, a man who I had always had the utmost respect for, a man that was the bravest, strongest, and most fearless man I knew, had ever challenged my courage in such a direct way. I literally froze. Not necessarily out of fear, but shock. As a young teenager, I was very competitive and never backed down from a challenge, but that one was difficult. But that one was different. Fear, pride, and determination were all swirling like a whirlwind of thoughts as I quickly accepted the challenge. Dad was surprised. I remember learning years later while speaking with him at the dinner table that he had never expected me to do it. But there I was, turning away from the light and back toward the cold, wet darkness, about to take on the loneliest and scariest challenge of my life. Just like that, I took off on my mission. I remember not wanting to walk too fast and make it look like I wanted over faster. Just like that, I took off on my mission. I remembered not wanting to walk too fast and make it look like I wanted it over faster out of fear. My rite of passage to manhood would be done gracefully and with poise. Of course, right away, my stronger inner boy voice got interrupted by my scared little boy voice. Do I really have what it takes? Like everyone, there have been times in my life where I've felt panic grip and freeze me. What if I fail? What will my dad think of me? I had seen a rat and for the most part couldn't even tell where the walls were. I did not want to touch those wet, slimy walls. What if I step on a rat or bang into the wall and hurt myself? To this day, I'm not sure if it was truly the natural awakening of a deep sense of bravery or realizing that I had no other choice, but I distinctly remember the hearing sound of my strongman voice emerge. "You've got this." It was how I imagined the Spanish conquistadors felt upon gaining sight of Mexico when Cortes gave them the order to burn the ships, their own ships. He wanted his men to know that retreat was not an option, and neither was it for me. Recalling the mental fitness I've gained walking home from my friend's house in the dark regularly, I told myself, there's nothing here in the dark that isn't here in the light. It's just a tunnel with a cement floor and stone walls, and all I have to do is put one foot in front of the other until I reach the exit. And that is exactly what I did. To this day, my family and I still talk about that tunnel on occasion. Rites of passage into manhood are a thing of the past for most young men, but I got mine and I will always appreciate the fact I did. Scott Steinberg, a researcher in strategic innovation, leadership, and change management, puts it best when he describes the 6 biggest fears you must overcome if you want to be successful. Scott has spent many years researching the underpinnings of successful entrepreneurs and has narrowed down the most important fears to conquer if you're ever to get out of your own way. They are the fear of change and some uncertainty, isolation, confrontation, rejection, losing control, and failure. Not only did I confront and overcome every single one of those fears in that lonely, dark, cold tunnel, but I also had to confront them on the long and lonely path to success. I now enjoy, in business, change and uncertainty are 2 ever-present challenges. A shark never just floats, it is always moving its tail to propel itself forward, not only to move, but to sustain life as oxygenated water passes through its gills. The currents of economic markets are powerful and always coming right at you, just like the ocean currents towards the shark. If you aren't persistently propelling yourself towards success with innovation and courage, you will find yourself getting swept away from your goals. Complacency is not a firm foundation. It is constantly falling behind in the chase of the next competitive advantage. An example might be new technology that helps me track outcomes more specifically and helps my patients book appointments online. Or I could be missing out on revolutionary evidence-based soft tissue and functional rehabilitation strategies to give me better results, or new HIPAA laws which challenge the way we communicate with our patients. Keeping a pulse on emerging opportunities and threats is essential. Accept that your journey to financial success will go through personal growth phases that feel like that path through the long, dark tunnel. The environment may trigger the scared adolescent voice and fill the void of clear sight with worst-case scenarios, just like children do when they fill the darkness with monsters and boogeymen. Find your way back to the center with the courage of the shark. Keep propelling yourself forward and trust the source that provided your success in the past is still there in the dark tunnel. Believe that it will always be there to guide you through. The fear of isolation is another common burden among entrepreneurs. The fact is, being an entrepreneur is a lonely endeavor. To organize and operate a business, you must live with a 30,000-foot view of your plan, which naturally separates you from not only your employees, but your friends and family as well. Of course, family and friends will be supportive, but you can't expect them to be excited about your vision as you are. It is important to balance a family and business life so that you stay engaged and connected with the needs of your loved ones. Having said that, there will certainly be seasons of your life when your goals demand heightened attention at the expense of your family and your social life. There is nothing wrong with that, so long as you There's nothing wrong with that, there is nothing wrong with that, so long as you communicate with your loved ones why it is necessary. Another layer of isolation can come from the separation from your colleagues when it comes to considering competitive advantages. I remember times when I would run into other chiropractors and crave a connection. Still, I was careful not to reveal the contents of my headspace descriptively as not to turn them onto my next move. Protecting your business from your competition is a natural response, but it does not mean you have to isolate yourself from other entrepreneurs in your field of business. Joining professional associations, online forums, continuing education seminars, and even local marketing collaboratives are all ways to make meaningful connections with other professionals. These are non-threatening opportunities to foster connections, much like the rare occasions when sharks congregate together in the presence of an abundance of food. Finally, the most important layer of overcoming the fear of isolation is self-awareness. Unfortunately, critical self-talk is a common characteristic of being an entrepreneur, not to mention being a human. One of the fascinating lessons I learned in my studies of functional neurology is that negative self-talk comes from the right brain. This is the area of your brain that you rely on for big picture thinking and planning, which inevitably is where entrepreneurs spend a majority of their time. Just like the 30,000-foot view we must have on our daily operations at all times, it is also important to maintain an observer role over thought processes. Milton Erickson, known as the father of clinical hypnosis, once said, "Patients are patients because they are out of touch with themselves. A lack of self-awareness gives room for pathological thoughts to become habits." It is important to balance the influence of both negative and positive self-talk. Being too critical to the point of self-loathing leads to self-defeat and sabotage. Yet, being too passive and falsely optimistic leads to justifying bad behaviors and choices. You must have a healthy relationship with not only your loved ones, friends, and colleagues, but also yourself. Developing self-awareness through meditation and mindfulness practice is one of my secret tools to always enjoying my own company. I encourage you to explore mindfulness training such as body scanning and develop transcendental meditation skills, which have been shown to help balance your brain's hemispheres and quiet out of control internal dialogue. The fear of confrontation and rejection are two more powerful challenges on the path to success. You might encounter these early in on your journey. These fears might arise when it comes time to tell your parents that you've decided to switch gears and drop out of school, or quit that corporate job so you can follow your passion and purpose. It takes courage to stand up to the ones you care about and the ones that matter to you most. I remember my parents thinking I was crazy when I told them I would quit my lucrative sales job where I had recently got a promotion to pursue a chiropractic education. It took me a long time to come up with the words to tell them. I wanted them to respect my decision, but I also didn't want them to be disappointed in me. My parents definitely had their opinions about my decision, but ultimately they understood my desire and fully supported it. In the end, they were proud of my success as a doctor of chiropractic. As with many fears, you will find that, as the saying goes, fear is usually false evidence appearing real. It rarely turns out as bad as your worst fears imagine it. Once you find the courage to confront the situation at hand, whether it is a new challenge to your business or challenging employee, approaching it with calm and a double dose of courage usually does the trick. Where I find the most important moments in my life to overcome the fear of confrontation was within my professional circle, like not wanting to be rejected by your family. It is also a scary idea for most entrepreneurs to be rejected by their peers. The fear is what keeps a healthy status quo within almost every social and professional cycle. We do not want to rock the boat too much and appear to be an outsider. Our status as an insider is valuable, but I would suggest not stifling the ingenuity and innovation that can come from the challenging the status quo. The chiropractic profession has been around for 125 years. In the beginning, it was established as a completely separate philosophy, art and science from the field of medicine, establishing itself as an alternative to drugs and surgery. The chiropractor is focused on restoring optimal function of the nervous system by removing neurological interference between the brain and the body caused by vertebral subluxations, which are misalignments of the vertebral joints in your spine. For close to 100 years, this was the identity of the chiropractic profession. Patients were coming to the chiropractor not just for back pain, but to maintain their nervous system's health and promote wellness. While I honor this powerful identity of my profession, what I noticed early in my education was that the practical application of this concept was, in my opinion, outdated. As a general practice, patients were being asked to return for follow-up visits 3 times a week for 4 weeks, then 2 times a week for 4 weeks, then 1 time a week for 4 weeks, and at the end, which they would start coming in every other week. Regardless of their clinical presentation, cookie-cutter protocols were being suggested that, in some cases, would total up to 90 visits. At first, while this plan seemed excessive, I did not question the concept, mostly because it was in line with what I had learned and understood about physical therapy profession. But as I continued to learn more, I discovered an interesting dynamic within the profession, a resistance to change. As movement science progressed and the modalities like neurodevelopmental rehabilitation and myofascial therapies became accepted as best practices, leaders in the chiropractic community rejected pioneers in the profession who were incorporating these tools within their practice. The status quo didn't appreciate the challenge of another tool in the toolbox, regardless of how effective the tools were. In my mind, and with the courage to confront the step, instead of simply maintaining a single modality, which would certainly always remain as the centerpiece of our practice, adding modalities that improve the tension in muscles and the strength of movement patterns would reduce the occurrence of vertebral subluxations. Even the idea of adjusting extremity joints like the knee and elbow was a controversial idea. The others and I, trying to advance the profession, were labeled, get this, dirty mixers, and chastised for not having enough faith in the adjustments. As president of my class in chiropractic school and frequent author in the university's newspaper, I felt it was my mission to support these contributing to the progress of the chiropractic profession. To this day, I continue to carry the torch among my peers in chiropractic forums, where I am often met with degrading insults, which no longer faze me, by the way, but also a rising tide of support. Some of the best chiropractors in the country now achieve incredible results for their patients by incorporating cutting-edge rehab techniques, functional nutrition, soft tissue therapies, and of course, still relying on the powerful influence of chiropractic adjustment. My practice alone, Chiropractic Solutions, where another doctor and I care for thousands of patients a year, has enjoyed the honor of being voted a best of Virginia practice for multiple years. Our outcomes rank in the top 90th percentile internationally. If it were not for overcoming the fear of confrontation and rejection, these results would not be possible. So fear not, and always stand up for what you feel is right. While some will likely reject you, you will be heralded by others, and more importantly, you will enjoy the satisfaction of being true to yourself. Let's finally talk about the fear of losing control, the fear of failure, and how all the fears we are discussing are related to your independence and passion and purpose. The fear of failure is directly tied to the fear of losing control. In my experience, these fears are exaggerated in known perfectionists. Who's a perfectionist? These are people who, due to this fear, aggressively manage every aspect of their lives because the concept that they are solely responsible for the outcome of their own lives is an inescapable reality. Failure is an incomprehensible outcome for perfectionists, and therefore their lives are a constant flow of heightened stress to avoid the shame and fear of what failure might mean for their lives. The truth is, perfectionism and entrepreneurship do not mix well. These are the people who in the corporate world are lonely, overworked managers because they're unable to avoid micromanaging their employees. Taking risks and managing the uncertainty of starting and running a business is too much for the mind of a perfectionist. In other words, they lack faith that they can navigate the forces that will lead them to their success. And that is what I want to finish with: the importance of how faith and trust are directly tied to your independence, passion, purpose, and yes, the ultimate success of your brand. I was raised in a very conservative, fundamentalist Christian family. Growing up, we went to church every weekend and prayed before every meal. I was taught to end every day with a prayer to thank God for the blessings in my life and to address the concerns I had about my world. I was a junior deacon in my church and Pathfinder of the year for both my church and the entire island of Bermuda. Pathfinder is the equivalent of Boy and Girl Scouts. I was rooted in my faith and always felt a sense of peace and strength that as long as I was true to God, God would be true to me. While many of my friends never went to church or talked about God, I always held a close relationship with my Heavenly Father. To this day, I believe that those early days of my life were the beginnings of my sense of healthy independence from my peers and the collective pressure that they can exert on an adolescent's mind. I wasn't a perfect Christian by any means, but my raising in the church was definitely a powerful source of the strength of my character that I continue to thank God for to this day. When I was a teenager, I began to question many of the stories I had learned in the Bible growing up. It was a struggle for me as I questioned so many things related to my denomination and certain parts of the Christian faith in general. I remember having a talk with my father one day about my struggles with my association with the church I was raised in. He said something that has guided my faith ever since. He said, "Dennis, when it comes to God, it is less about religion and much more about the relationship." This was a liberating concept for me because while I struggled with certain church doctrines, my faith in the Almighty Creator of the universe had never wavered. So then, I felt free to explore my own spirituality, and that's exactly what I did. Very few people know that chiropractic medicine has deep roots in vitalistic philosophy. In fact, the major premise of chiropractic states universal intelligence is in all matter and continually gives to it all its properties and actions, thus maintaining it in existence. I was drawn to the chiropractic world because I wanted to have a career helping people, but also vitalistic philosophy of the profession closely reflected my personal values of living, breathing, creative force. This was the same force I had developed a closer relationship with while growing up. It was deep-seated in my character. This force was an eternal force that was omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. As a result of my journey in life, I have concluded that this force transcends all religions and holds no allegiance to any particular creed other than goodness. It is this understanding of the nature of God that the founding fathers of the United States also had when they declared, "In God we trust." Another component of the culture and philosophy of my chiropractic education is the concept of lasting purpose, which is a direct reflection of the profession's major premise. The lasting purpose is a guiding principle to live in another directed life, to give, to do, to love, to serve out your own abundance. In the library of my chiropractic university in Atlanta, Georgia, is a small room that houses the historical texts which outline the profession's founding philosophy. I will never forget a thin book that stuck out to me in that small room. It was entitled How to Get Rich. Struck by how the title seemed to be out of place in a philosophy section, I grabbed it and opened it. Inside the book was composed of a single word: serve. Many books in the room helped establish my developing philosophy of not only my profession, but of my life. It is the knowledge of a universal, eternal creative force that continually gives me all of its properties and actions. It moderates my fear of change and uncertainty, of isolation, confrontation, rejection, losing control, and failure. It is the knowledge that a benevolent force helps guide my path. It ignites a courage for me to be independent and pursue my purpose with passion, much like a shark trusts his instincts to find food so it may survive and thrive. Whether it is the words of the prophets of our holy books, the enlightened words of America's founding fathers, the philosophical texts of the founders of chiropractic medicine, or the words of Yoda, trust the force because the force is with you. I encourage you to see connections to your deepest nature, which is an innate connection to all of humanity and all of nature and the creative force of the universe. Make your decisions through the lens of service, and I promise you that you will truly experience what it feels like to be rich one way or another. That's the end of chapter 4. And about Dr. Dennis is at the end of the chapter.
Follow Dr. Dennis DuPont on Twitter at Dr. DuPont or on his website, drdupont.com. That's spelled DRDAPONTE.com.